Good afternoon, gentlemen. I had an idea for a video where we would talk about writing dungeons because I have been playing a lot between three different real life groups, multiple two or three online groups, some other play groups, solo playing and reviewing a ton of different dungeons. I've really looked at a lot of modules lately, and I wanted to go through the main pitfalls that I've seen in a bunch of these dungeons. And we're going to go through about 6 different categories, which are going to be layout, organization, mapping, treasure, art punk, and then playtesting. So, these are the mistakes that people have made when writing dungeons that I can see. The first group of stuff is layout problems. The biggest one is the bullet point obsession that I see with people doing. What happens is on the page they have what could be a paragraph, and it's a bullet point, so it's indented, and then underneath that they will have more bullet points, so those are also indented. So you end up with what could have been 10 or 12 words on a line is now 3 or 4 words on a line, and most of the page is just blank, empty white space with these ridiculous indent from bullets. This looks really stupid. I don't think it's a good organization technique. I don't think it really helps people learn the module. I think what's going on is that people have a short attention span. But what you could be doing instead, should be doing, is just writing a paragraph. Put a header, like use headers. So like heading 2, heading 3, whatever. This is the section about the orc faction, and write like 6 to 8 sentences, and break that up into 2 or even 3 paragraphs, so that there's these little quick snippets of text that people can read, and they get the key information as fast as they can. All this indenting is literally just wasting space and making the whole thing harder to read and use. And in the same vein, change your margins to be narrow, and change the gutter in the center of the page to also be narrow. That will also save you so much in terms of space, and then you'll just fit more on every page, and everything will look nicer and be easier and quicker to use. The one of the premier modules for doing this well, in No Art Punk 2, the Tomb of the Twice Crowned King by Hawkins was included, and that has a really, really good layout. I strongly recommend basically just copying that. One of the problems I did notice is that the monster stat blocks are kind of like floating at the bottom of the page, sort of outside the text, and they're not on the right page every time. Sometimes the monsters they're referring to were actually on a different page than where the monsters were. So this is one of the other things that I talk about in organization, which is the idea of putting the things where they are instead of in an appendix or somewhere else in the book, which should seem obvious to me. I don't know, but we'll get there. Right now we're talking about don't use the bullet points. Fuck with this bullet point shit. I hate it. Use paragraphs with headers. Careful with your margins, your gutters. One of the other things you can do, and I know Word can do this, I don't know if OpenOffice can do it, but I would be surprised if it can't, is you can once you're using those headers we talked about, you can now automatically generate bookmarks. So the PDF will have a list of bookmarks that you can click through and see, oh, okay, go to this section of the book. It's super easy to navigate when you're online, or in front of a computer running online. Use the PDF. It's so good. You got to use it. And there is one more thing there with a layout thing. If your module is very large, so you have potentially multiple dungeons, multiple maps, use the headers and footers to include, like, this part of the book is the first dungeon, this part of the book is the second dungeon. Because then when you're flipping through and you glance at the top, maybe you've printed the book out as well. That's super useful to know, oh, I'm in this section of the book. Okay, I got to go back or forward, whatever. Another just a little thing you can do that is really, really helpful. And one other thing with the layout, the maps. This whole thing where people started putting the maps like in the page that they're currently on, like you put little snippets of the map or even the whole map, or like even like a whole miniature floor, that really sucks. Don't fucking do that. Just put the whole map at the back of the book, or even in the front of the book if you want to put it first. Whichever, it doesn't matter, front or back. Put it together. Just put all the damn maps together, because there is no universe where you do not have the map printed out or pulled up separately from the rest of the book. That is the only way you will ever use any module, is to always have the map in front of you on one side and the keys on the other. So this idea that you're going to mix the two is it's just wrong. It's fucked up. Please do not do that. So that was basically my layout stuff. The next category is organization. And I so the worst case scenario, the one that I've seen in the absolute worst case, is you have an encounter. It references a monster. And that monster references treasure. And the treasure references a different monster, which then references its random encounter entry. And then you can get these situations where there's information that's like spread around, where there's an entry for the monster, there's an appendix for the treasure, an appendix for the other monsters. There's information that's included in like other sections of the book, like in the background only, or in a faction section, or in a random encounter table, and it's all spread all over the place, and this is just a complete mess. Where is the information I need? If you can help it, put the damn information in one place, just one place in the book. If you have an encounter, and there's a monster that shows up, and it has a magic item, and those are the only places in the book that the monster and the treasure appear, just put the damn information in the encounter entry, where it belongs, where I'm going to see it and use it. I understand sometimes you have monsters that they appear in multiple places. A lot of the times, these are the monsters that will appear on the random encounter table. So usually the best place to put that is in the random encounter table, or like just after it, you put those monsters right there. And then anywhere else they appear, you can reference back and say, hey, these are the same monsters from the random encounters, those stat blocks. If you really need to, if you really have a monster that appears in multiple places, honestly, if you can, just put the stats in both places. Something you can do also is if you have, room 12 and room 14, and they both use the same monster, you can say in room 14, just, hey, look, reference room 12. Because it's only like a page back maybe or whatever. It's fine. That's totally cool. You can just reference the previous place. That way you don't have to repeat a monster stat block if the stat block is too big and it would take up too much space. But honestly, if you can repeat them, just repeat them. And then I do appreciate the idea of having an appendix specifically for the new things. I think if you want to do this, you have to consider it like a bonus. Write the module so it just works, and then if you also want to include an appendix that repeats that information in one place, it needs to do that. Just repeat it in one place. That's fine. I realize it makes things larger, more page count, but mostly people are doing PDFs anyway, letting people do their own print on demand with Lulu. So I don't know. Don't worry about the page count so much if you can help it. Obviously, that won't apply to everybody, but for the most part, I think the people who are publishing at a level to care about that have these problems sorted out anyway. So, whatever. And another organizational problem that I kind of dipped into was just the idea of the factions. This is a big thing that a lot of modules have really sucked at, which is you have NPCs or factions and you've never explained them. You did not explain what their motivations were. And it's not always obvious what their motivations would even possibly be. To some extent, I'm willing to make it up as I go. Like if the module kind of hints at the possibilities or makes it sort of obvious what these people would be doing here, like, oh yeah, they're obviously here because they're mining for treasure, or they are trying to take over, or whatever. That's all fine. But oftentimes, people do write modules with more subtle motivations, or like just the type of personality that an NPC will have. Please just include that. Like, put in what you were imagining what was going to be. You need to make sure you're writing down what you're actually thinking. Like, what you thought was going to be the case, you need to put that in the book. And the best place for that, I think, is in the front, before the module. If you want to put it in the back as an appendix for factions, that's fine too. But I think it should probably go in the front as like a preamble about what this module is all about. So either way, you just need to make sure to include this information. I think that mostly covers organization. So mapping, maps. One of the things I've seen a lot is the loopy-doopy. You have one loop. It's just a circle. And people often don't even think about the loop either, where the players can go either way, and the map and the game doesn't work if they go one of the two ways. This is also covered in playtesting, where you need to find these mistakes. But really think about why you're adding a loop in the first place. And for the most part, the way you should be using loops is in the context of the dungeon. You might have several loops, and usually the players can't access them. They can access like one major loop, but they can't access other smaller loops or other major loops without defeating something special. Either a monster that's too tough, or they find a certain key to get through a door, or whatever. Maybe there's a puzzle, some kind of thing that prevents that loop from actually being usable off the bat. The players have to do something special to gain access to using that loop. I think that's probably the simplest thing to say to people when you're just getting started. Obviously, there may be more advanced techniques that you can figure out as you play the game more, but that's what you really want to do when you're just starting out for sure, is make sure that your loops are not just a freebie to just do whatever anytime, and the players just kind of wander around meaninglessly. Multiple entrances, by the way, are also always good. They're basically always good. But you do want to think about, like, how are the players going to even find these? Just slapping them in the book and then not even referencing them is sort of weird. Like, how would they ever encounter this? It is fine if there are entrances where they can only find them after entering the dungeon, and then they find a new way to leave, and then they can also use that to come back. That's fine, but try to make sure that's actually meaningful or interesting, that it won't like be pointless. Like, if they have to beat the dungeon 100% in order to find the extra exit, what's the point? I mean, there's no point. You got to think about this stuff. In terms of the maps, other stuff is just like, make sure your labels are actually on the map. Make sure you're not missing labels or things are not mislabeled. I've seen plenty of dungeons where they reference a room that doesn't exist, or the key has an entry for a room that isn't labeled on the map, or there's letters like A and B that aren't on the map. And this is another thing, the labeling scheme. Please just use numbers. For the love of God, just number everything that is actually a meaningful room. Just number the damn rooms. You want to get good, if possible, at labeling the meaningful areas instead of just numbering everything. Like, if people will label hallways and say that, and then the text is like one line that says this is hallway. You didn't need to label that, or you should have labeled it, but then put something interesting there. The idea that there are huge the other side of this token is where people just don't label anything and the map is just a bunch of empty space. What are you doing? Like, why do you have rooms that don't have anything, like literally nothing in them? Like, empty rooms don't have to be literally empty. I mean, sometimes they will be. That's totally fine. But a lot of times, even something stupid like a paint can. This room has nothing in it but a paint can in the corner. Players can come up with some technique to use that. You can splash paint on invisible enemies. You can use the paint can to, like, sit at a door, and when enemies open the door, they knock over the paint can, and now you're like, oh, there's enemies coming. Little stuff like this goes a long way to make the dungeon a lot more interesting and exciting. And it really benefits the players who are thinking about the dungeon in a holistic way instead of thinking it in like a video game, like room way. I think I said this already, but just the idea of making sure your loops don't trivialize the dungeon, where basically they find the ending instantly and avoid all the danger. I have seen that where someone looped the dungeon, and if the players left went to the one direction, there's no game. Like, the game is over and there's nothing happens. Moving on from mapping, the next section I have here is treasure. Treasure is wild to me because it's so messed up in both directions. At the low levels, you have people playing 1 to 3 modules and they get 50 gold pieces, if that, in a 40 room module. And then on the other side, you can have a 7-room dungeon practically. I mean, it's got 40 rooms on the damn map, but there's only 7 actual rooms. And then there's like 5 million gold pieces for 8th level characters. And it's like, bro, what the hell are you doing? This is like 40 to 100 times too much treasure. The players should not actually be leveling up every session, except maybe at the early levels 1 or 2. It's pretty reasonable to level up every session if they play well. Maybe every other session if they're playing okay, and then otherwise they just die and they have to start over. But the Gygaxian standard, which is a simple standard that you can use for any dungeon, is 500 gold pieces per character level per room. So if it's a first level module, there's 500 gold pieces in every room. You don't necessarily have to put them literally in every room. You could have a room that's empty and another room with 1,000, or you could spread them out in some other ways. Whatever, but that's like the baseline. And again, if they're level 5, now it's 2,500 gold pieces per room. If they're level 8, it's 4,000 gold pieces per room. And this is where things go crazy because people come up with like 400,000 gold pieces per room, which is literally 100 times more too much at the high levels. Like, it's just so weird. I don't get it. But that's like the basic standard. I use a slightly different model myself, but the numbers are roughly in that ballpark. That's the right order of magnitude, and certainly getting the magnitude right is the best place to start. You can kind of fine tune as you understand the game more. And part of this is also just that the treasure is not just all lying out in the open. The rooms should not literally just be like room, grab treasure, room, fight monster, grab treasure, room, dispel magic, grab treasure. Like that's too simple. You need to do a little more. You can have hidden treasure. You can have treasure that's literally inaccessible. Like the player, there's an NPC that knows where it is, and if they just kill that guy, it's gone. They'll never get the treasure. You need to be. You need to. I personally like to have approximately half the treasure be hidden. Although I also am kind of on the other side where do. I put more treasure in the dungeon and then have a lot of it be hidden. But you do what you want to do. Figure out what's best, what works for you. Another thing that I really, really, really hate is the whole dungeon is empty, and then all the treasure's at the end. And this really sucks when there's like 6 to 12 magic items in one damn room, and now you got to explain all of them to the players all at once. It's so it drives me crazy. It sucks up like hours of time just doing all this all at once. It's so much easier when you can hand out an item here and there throughout the dungeon. You don't have to explain them all at once. The players are not going to argue necessarily about who gets what because it'll be more obvious. Like, oh, it's a wizard staff. The wizard gets it, and I don't know, stuff like that. It just tends to work better, I think, if the treasure is more drip fed throughout the dungeon. It also makes people feel better, like like this is great. Like we did something specific and we were rewarded immediately for our correct play instead of hypothetically being rewarded later when we just win. Uh, the other part of this is just that it can make the whole dungeon more dynamic and interesting if you find potions that you use to beat the dungeon, that kind of thing. That's way better than having them all come up at the end, and then you're going to use them for the next dungeon. Speaking of potions and stuff, one thing I do think is a big problem is the number of wands and staves with so many magic item charges. There's this idea that you're going to play the dungeon and you're going to potentially even rest before clearing the whole thing. But once you start to have, you play through a module with 40 rooms, and in the 40 rooms you get 400 charges worth of magic wand. Did I have to spend 400 charges to beat the dungeon? Like if I freely fireball, cone of cold, lightning bolt, polymorph, negation, every round, I will still not use all the charges in your dungeon. And then when it's done, I have gained charges. I've gained more than I lost. So we literally could do the whole dungeon without ever resting. And no one, and the worst part is this overemphasizes the magic user in a game that is already too magic user focused. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. The idea that your characters are actually gaining resources so fast that they should literally never rest. Like we're almost right back to 5th edition, right? Where we're actually in a worse place than 5th edition because now the characters should go from level 1 to 20 literally without, like, in one day. Like the day should never end. They should never rest. They should never recover their spell slots or hit points because they're gaining potions and healing and wands at a faster rate than they're ever losing resources, and the whole thing stops making any sense. And this, please, for the love of God, don't give me this horse shit about item saves either. This is almost always a problem for the fighters more than anyone else, and people will obviate this problem in several ways. They will either use extra player storage, they'll spread the items out, they'll play in a more like boring and tedious way to avoid their items getting destroyed. And even if you're like really good at DMing in this way to let this happen, people will save things like wishes. Like if we ever find a wish, well, we're just going to save it until a dragon breath wipes out the party and destroys all of our items. Even if we get resurrected, we'll just wish to undo that because that was worse than like we could have that erased months of progress, kind of thing. And not just the deaths, because like the deaths you come back from, but like the idea of the item loss. That's like you get this weird position, and the game ends up being weird. Don't get me wrong, I do think you do need item saves. I've definitely destroyed my players' items on multiple occasions. I think it does make sense, but that is not enough on its own to counteract the staggering quantity of wand charges being handed out in a lot of modules I see. So that's my rant about treasure. we've got two more sections here. Art punk, the art punk side of things, and I'm putting some weird shit in here. But this is one of the big problems: is where the fuck is the adventure? Seriously, where is the adventure? You start the module and you play for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, and you haven't found the dungeon yet. It's boring. Get the hell out of here with that. The you can. It's okay to have a framework. The first module I wrote, Vault for the Warlord, has a town and all that stuff, but you got to be able to just play the game like within an hour. Like people need to be rolling dice within like 30 minutes. Like this whole thing where you're gonna mess around trying to find the dungeon. Like the DM is being very coy. He's like, "Ooh, I may talk to my NPCs." Thing is just the worst. Um, you got to dial that way back and just get people into the game as fast as possible to the fun parts. Uh, Another thing I have here is where the random encounters. Like, you got to put random encounters in your dungeon, or there's no pressure. Just put some damn random encounters in there. If you don't want to do random encounters, you can do other things. You can do time limits. You can do bigger events that come through. But you got to have some kind of time pressure, and random encounters are usually the best way to do that. Certainly, they're the easiest way to do that. So probably just put random encounters in your damn dungeons. And then another thing is, in addition to like where's the adventure, where's the random encounters, where is the game? Uh, the I'm going to call out Fullerton on this because Gates of the Gan and Withered Crag are 95% empty space. And this really, everyone just gets bored out of their damn minds. They're just like, they're mocking the dungeon. They're laughing. They're literally like busting their asses. Busting a gut, laughing like they're gonna hurt themselves, physically laughing at how stupid the dungeon is. Where they're just like they're literally opening the doors, like it's gonna be another empty room. And they open it, and it's another empty room, and everybody just starts laughing hysterically and like pounding the table and like literally choking to death. And I guess that's kind of fun in its own right, just writing something so dog shit that everybody is laughing themselves to death in real life. But seriously, we want to play. We're here to play a game. You got to put some game in your module. So please don't publish like fake modules that aren't real and don't have any game in them. Um, yeah. Uh, there's another thing, which is I hate this. This I'm I want to try the Jaquay stuff a little more, but this idea of dungeons where the solution to everything is to figure out what the DM was thinking and solve his little puzzles sucks. That's it's okay. I'm okay with that once in a while, but like the idea of dungeons where there's literally only one solution bores me to death, and it's lame. It creates a bad way of thinking about the game for the players where they're obsessed constantly with trying to figure out what the DM is thinking instead of like engaging with the game more genuinely and just taking it for what it is. I don't know. That's another important aspect to me. Another thing here is the whole idea. I brought this up before, but Magic User D&D, where it's literally just like globs and globs of dudes, dozens of dudes. They've got so many hit points. The fighters can't get their multi attacks. The fighters can't kill an enemy in one hit. They can't kill an enemy in two hits. It gets ridiculous where it's just like fireball, 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 and everybody else is just standing around waiting for the fireballs to finally kill all the monsters. I hate Magic User D&D so much. Like, there's more classes. You got to put more stuff in there for the other players. It cannot just be just Magic User D&D. That I hate that shit. Um, Writing in your book to solely amuse the DM is okay, but you can't just do that. You have to have an actual game in there. Chateau Montgris was probably the biggest example of this. Where that is so fun to read. It is as good as reading any novel, but it is basically not playable. I mean, there's just nothing there to run. Basically, I mean, you don't really have an actual to play. So, it is what it is. The last thing I have here under art punk is just some of the pervert sicko shit that comes up in modules. Like, if I get the impression that you were literally jerking off to your writing, um, what the hell? Get out of here! Like, don't put that in your book. For the love of God, if you're thinking about it, if you're looking at it, and you're thinking, "Oh, this is so cute. It's my welcome to my magical realm," don't don't put it in there. Just don't do it. That's it's. I'm not going to run that. I'm just going to ignore it, and it sickens me to have read it. I don't want to run your stuff anymore. Um, I just don't. I see it and I'm like, I'm never touching anything this guy's ever written ever again. He's a sicko. So Art Punk. Just real quick, the last section here is just about playtesting. You playtest the damn module. It's basically the gist of it. And there is a thing here where you're only playtesting for a captive audience. Like there are people who literally only play with their children, or they only play with like one play group that has played together forever, and they're playing. The reason they're hanging out is not because of D&D. They're hanging out for other reasons, and their sessions are not really fun. And you're not. That's not like a real playtest. Like you need to playtest with random people at like a convention, or and not like in your like a private room where you play with your friends that you always hang out with at every convention, but like the actual like random audience at the con. Like, can you run a good game and like make these people happy and have a good time? Or go to your game store. Run the session at a game store. Run for, or run it online. Post a random pickup group. Play it for people who've never played with you before. Can you entertain them? Can they have a good time with your module? That's a real proper playtest. And ideally, in a perfect world, you would get a second person to run your module for you. I realize that's a little, it's pretty hard to get to that point. But at least playtest for people who are not your captive audience. Playtest with real people. And also, when you do write something, by the way, write for the sessions you actually can play. Don't write for like level 12 when you have never played level 12. And don't write for systems you don't play in either. Write for the system you actually play at the levels you actually play at, and I think you will have a much better time. Yeah, so basically that's it. And this video is probably pretty long. It's almost about 30 minutes, which isn't too bad, but we talked about layout, organization, mapping, treasure, art punk, and playtesting. And I think there will be a follow-up video talking about the different types of playgroups, because I did get to thinking about this idea of like the captive audience playgroup and how that really warps a lot of the thinking around the game. Especially in the community discussions. Of course, another one that warps the discussions is the armchair guys who don't play at all, no games, or worse. But I want to. I think there's a way to make that video and have it not be too negative, because I think we can focus on what makes a good group good, and like what the possibilities are. But anyway, this is, like I said, this has been pretty long. Hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully you learned something. I don't know. Let me know if there's any other types of videos you want me to make. I will see you guys later. Peace.